Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the last Newman Lecture of the academic year. My name is Zach Tillema.
And I'm Shidea Parija.
It's good to be with you for tonight's lecture. As some of you already know, I work as a volunteer missionary at the Oregon State Newman Center. I graduated last spring with a degree in chemical engineering. While at university, I was exposed to many ideas that will be discussed tonight. I'm excited to hear these through a Catholic lens to learn better what the church teaches.
I graduated from American University with a degree in international studies last December. I also work as a volunteer missionary assisting with our different programs. Many of my friends are members of the LGBTQ+ community, and as such, over the years, we have had many conversations about sexuality. I'm hoping to gain a more nuanced understanding of how we, as members of the Catholic Church, ought to engage with this important topic.
One of the purposes of the Newman Lecture series is to inform our intellects of the truth of the faith. Many teachings of the church today have been misunderstood, and yet we are called on to believe them. This can cause some tension, and I'm hoping that tonight's lecture can serve as our guide for us for how we can lovingly respond to members of the LGBTQ+ community.
We'd like to thank our host for the night, the Newman Center at Oregon State University, who for the last 4 years has hosted these Newman Lectures. To speak on behalf of the Newman Center at OSU, I would like to welcome to our screen our director, Father Maximo Stock.
Thank you very much, Shidea and Zach, for hosting us tonight, and thank you, Dr. Janet Smith, for being with us in this night. And I just wanted to give almost the framework for why are we discussing this topic as part of the Newman Lectures. G.K. Chesterton said once that, quote, "The special mark of the modern world is not that it is skeptical, but that it is dogmatic without knowing it." And in the topic of homosexuality, I think we can all agree that it is surrounded by a lot of intolerance, and a lot of screaming and yelling and hatred that becomes very dogmatic in one direction. And both sides are also responsible for this. We could say that those who we would consider more liberal or more conservative, both sides are responsible for this lack of tolerance or being able to listen to one another, and to a lack of approaching this topic with love, especially when you go to the extremes. That is not the purpose of tonight's lecture. Dr. Janet Smith will be speaking about a perspective of faith about the topic of homosexuality. And this is a topic that touches all of us very closely. A perspective of faith that should always keep in consideration two things. One of those is compassion, being able to be loving, and the other one is truth. Like St. Paul said, love in truth. We also believe at the Newman Center that this generation of young people is ready to re-engage in meaningful and respectful conversations, that wants to be over this yelling and screaming and be able to sit down and create a dialogue. Dr. Janet Smith will educate us more on the topic so that we can be able to hold these conversations. So thank you, Dr. Janet Smith, for being with us tonight. And thank you to our hosts for hosting us in this night as well.
Thank you, Father Maximo. If you would like to learn more about the Newman Lecture series or the other things the Newman Center has to offer, you can check us out at osunewman.org. With that, we have a very special invitation in regards to this. We'll be kicking off our last alpha of the academic year this upcoming Tuesday, and it happens every Tuesday at 7 p.m. at the Newman Center. If you are interested or you know someone who would be a great fit for this program, please feel free to go on our website to learn more.
So now we'd like to explain how the night will go. Once we introduce our speaker for the night, she will have about 40 minutes to present. Following the presentation, there'll be time for questions. We ask that if you have a question, submit it during the talk using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We acknowledge that questions could be very similar, so we will manage sorting through them as you send them in. Questions are open to everyone, and we welcome all questions. However, we ask that they are succinct and to the point.
So now it's time to introduce our speaker for the night. Dr. Janet Smith is an acclaimed international speaker on human sexuality. She authors a regular column for the National Catholic Register and has appeared on Geraldo, Fox Morning News, CNN International, CNN Newsroom, Al Jazeera, and EWTN, among others. Professor Smith has received 3 honorary doctorates and several awards for her scholarship and service. One of her areas of specialty is homosexuality, how to understand the original view of our sexuality, and how the Catholic Church and all her members can lovingly interact with this topic. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Janet Smith.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate all the trouble that you have taken to make this happen. I think that the introductory remarks were just fantastic. I do think we have to learn how to talk about these things. And I love the fact that Shedadiah mentioned that she has a number of friends in the community, as I do myself. But growing up, we didn't even know who was homosexual. We had no idea. And I'm really looking forward to learning a lot from this generation. I look at my nieces and nephews, and they're very comfortable with their friends who have same-sex attraction. It's not anything really peculiar to them. And I think that's a step forward, that we see people as persons first. And I think they do. And I think my generation had a hard time, in a sense, getting past hearing about someone's sexual orientation and then just reorienting ourselves in a sense. So I think we made a step forward, honestly, in relationships. We still need a long way to go in many respects. And one of them is speaking the truth in love, which I hope to talk about here. So here, I'm going to get this started. Hold on. Doesn't, there we go. I have to get the slideshow going. All right, so the topic here is certainly the church's teaching on homosexuality, but it's same-sex attraction and responding with truth and love. And this is Jesus with the Apostle John leaning on his chest. And some people thought that this was a homosexual relationship. Quite impossible, honestly. But it does show the kind of intimacy that is certainly possible between 2 males and 2 friends and 2 Christians. And I think that's something we certainly want to keep in mind. And we want to respond in truth and love to and for our brothers and sisters, our friends, our co-workers, our aunts and uncles, and sometimes our parents, right? We find out that, in fact, our parents may suffer with same-sex attraction or experience same-sex attraction. So it's no longer a strange thing to us. It's something that's out and about. And again, I think this helps us relate to people as persons. I edited a book that came from a conference, and it's called Living the Truth in Love, Pastoral Approaches to Same-Sex Attraction. I think it's a marvelous compendium of articles from many different disciplines and perspectives. So if you're looking for one volume, I recommend this. A second volume of such essays is being put together this year. Just a little fact that's important for note, if you ask people how many people they think in our culture do have same-sex attraction, many of them will say 50%, some will say 30%, maybe 25%, 10%. Well, it's actually only 2% of people who have attraction to members of the same sex. That doesn't mean it's a small number because there's a lot of people. This is a crowd of people at one of John Paul II's events. And you can be sure a lot of young people in that crowd have experienced same-sex attraction. You can also be sure that quite a few people in this group, these are saints of the church, this is a Fra Angelico, that they experience same-sex attraction and were able to master their appetites, which everybody in that slide needed to do, no matter what their personal challenges were. So these are the truths we need to know. We need to know what the church teaches about same-sex attraction. Many people have really, outlandish views of what the church's teaching is. I have to go through it pretty quickly, but I hope will at least hit the main points. What are the kinds of life histories that, in a sense, lead to people experiencing same-sex attraction? What is the gay lifestyle? What is it? We want to look at the many physical, psychological, and social realities of the gay lifestyle. We want to talk about what the gay experience is. It is often isolation, heartbreak, and low self-esteem. And we want to take a look at the fact that those with same-sex attraction almost always think they can't be otherwise, that same-sex attraction is their identity. So one of the best ways for us to be able to be with people who experience same-sex attraction is to understand what it is they're going through. Many parents especially have a hard time relating to their children and have to ask them, what has this been like for you? How have you been, how have you responded people, how have they responded to you? Have you been bullied? And trying to learn to listen and ask people what it is that they've experienced before we go preaching at them or talking to them or trying to convince them of anything. Much more often than trying to convince people, we should actually try to share information. You tell me something, I'll tell you something. And maybe we shouldn't fight too much about it, but just try to understand each other and what it is we bring to a conversation. Let's quick look at the Catholic Church teaching. It's based, as Catholic Church teaching is, on just about everything, on both reason and revelation. Science and faith in the Catholic Church can never be, in the Church's understanding, can never be in contradiction to each other. So we expect science actually to support the Church's teaching on sexuality and certainly on homosexuality. It's hard to find that these days because the media has gotten to be so much of a censor of views. And many of the sites that I used to be able to go to for information no longer exist. Amazon has been refusing to carry books about homosexuality that come from a Catholic or Christian point of view. So it's going to be harder and harder to find the information that's out there, but it always can be done. I've been following the CDC, the Center for Disease Control website for years. They very much censor their own reporting now, things they won't report that they used to report. So of course, one of the major sources for the Catholic Church and Christians on anything is Scripture itself. And I'm listening to Michael Schmitz's The Bible in a Year, 17 minutes a day. I have to slow it down, it's too fast for me, but it's marvelous. So the Bible is a great place to go. We'll just touch on that here, but there's a great deal in there. The best book on it is by a Presbyterian theologian, Robert Gagnon, and this is a big, thick book, and he explains what the Bible says about homosexuality and how to answer those who read the text differently from how the tradition has read them. Again, there's the Catechism of the Catholic Church we'll be looking at quite a bit. There's a marvelous book by Father John Harvey, Homosexuality in the Catholic Church. And then there's all sorts of little pamphlets and position papers put up by various bishops' conferences. Ministry to Persons with a Homosexual Inclination is one put out by the U.S. bishops. It's a very good pamphlet, and it should be something that anybody dealing with students, people, should be familiar with that pamphlet. And these are two church documents. The church is due for a new one, 1975 and 1985. It's time the church put out a new document, but these are very, very, very good. Okay, some of the Christian anthropology. And of course, this is scriptural. We read from the very beginning of Scripture, from the very beginning, male and female, he created them. This was just the pivotal event in creation. Everything else was made for mankind, and everything else was made for this relationship, male and female. And we see how comfortable Adam and Eve are here with each other, naked without shame. Most of us are involved in some kind of relationships, and very rarely are they this really harmonious. They may be harmonious momentarily, but we don't experience it for a really extremely prolonged time. And God said two things to man that are very important at the very beginning. It's not good that man should be alone. We're meant to be in relationship, right? All of us. And actually in a spousal relationship, which doesn't necessarily mean being in a physical relationship with someone of the opposite sex. It means a spousal relationship is really one of complete self-giving and commitment to others. So I'm a single woman, but I really hope, I try to live a life of self-giving, and I'm involved in all sorts of people's lives. It's not good for me to be alone. I don't want to live as a hermit. And even that, if you do it right, is not living alone. He also told us to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So clearly the sexuality was meant to bring us in contact with each other, in union with each other, and also to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. This is the whole picture. What I just showed you was a part of the earlier picture. And we see above Adam and Eve, we see Satan. And Satan is Lucifer, the snake and the fallen angel, one and the same. And that's their embrace, all right? It's not a loving embrace. It's an embrace that wants to break the loving embrace below because it's a threat to them, right? After mankind sinned, we got cast out of the garden. We no longer be comfortable there, honestly. I think we were running out of our own initiative. And sometimes I think the angel might have been trying to get us back. God loves us. He spent all of the salvation history as God wanting to get us back. But we're not comfortable with goodness. We don't feel like we belong. And these are the consequences of the fall. There's a broken relationship with God. We run from God now. There's a broken relationship between Adam and Eve. They started accusing each other. She did it, he did it. There's a broken relationship with creation. Childbirth is painful and breaking the earth is difficult. And there's a broken relationship within persons, all right? We have ignorance now. We don't know everything we need to know. And we have unruly passions. And so the fall was a very consequential thing. It brought brokenness into the world from which everybody, except Mary, the mother of God, has suffered and suffered a great deal. All right. Christ came to restore our fallen nature and even more. He helps us gain self-mastery, which is rule of our passions. And the virtue we're going to be talking about here is chastity, or the virtue of self-mastery in respect to sex. He gives us grace to do that. We can just have to keep asking God, just keep asking him, help me, help me, help me. And he gave us the sacraments, especially reconciliation and the Eucharist, which are great aids to any kind of improvement we want to make in this world. And he heals us, right? He heals us. And he gives us directions. Keep my commandments, go and sin no more. Those are very difficult things to do. And we can only do it with the grace of God. St. Francis is very pure, of course, but he struggled not with same-sex attraction. We don't know. Some people think he did because he was so slight. And I don't know why a slight person would be more likely to have same-sex attraction than anyone else, but that's what some people think. But you see that rose bush beside him. And if you go to Assisi, you'll at some point go to the site where there's a rose bush that has no thorns on it, because one day he was struggling with some temptation, so he threw himself into a rose bush, thinking that having the pain of the spikes or whatever with the rose would help him overcome his temptation. As it turns out, when the rose bush came in touch with his pure flesh, it no longer had those prickly parts to it. But this is a marvelous fresco in the crypt of the Basilica of St. Francis. And it's all about gaining chastity. Right here we have chastity. She's in a tower. She's hard to attain. And here we have Francis himself, and he's being cleansed, being washed cleanliness and fortitude are going to help him make his way up to chastity. And over here we have him coming to the bath, and these are his friends who are helping him. And over here, we have a bunch of devils who are trying to pull Francis away from getting chastity. So it's a fight. It's a fight to have chastity. It's better done with friends, but also to know you're going to be attacked by demons. So the Catechism, what does it say? It says, everyone, man and woman, should acknowledge and accept his sexual identity. Physical, moral, and spiritual difference and complementarity are oriented towards the goods of marriage and the flourishing of family life. The harmony of the couple and of society depends in part on the way in which the complementarity, needs, and mutual support between the sexes are lived out. The Church clearly sees, based on scripture and philosophy, and even science, that male and female are made for each other. We're complementary. We bring things to a relationship that the other one doesn't have. And it's oriented towards marriage and the flourishing of family life. Each of the two sexes is an image of the power and tenderness of God. Each of the two sexes, with equal dignity, though in a different way. The union of man and woman in marriage is a way of imitating in the flesh the Creator's generosity and fecundity. Therefore, a man leaves his father and his mother and cleaves to his wife, and they become one flesh. All human generations proceed from this union. So that's the fundamental truth that informs all the Church's teaching about sexuality. It's meant for self-giving, It's meant for union with others, and it's meant for procreativity, but just also creativity. That's my family, my parents. That's a long time ago. You can kind of tell by everything in there. This young woman here, she's now 30 and she's got 3 kids of her own. There is a homosexual brother-in-law in here, a homosexual nephew, a couple divorces. It's not all happiness, but all of human sexuality is directed towards creating family and creating loving relationships that go on for generation after generation. Okay, the Catechism also tells us about original sin. Again, we've talked about that. The fall is behind everything, keeps reminding us. And these are the offenses against chastity. Lust, and lust is not just a powerful sexual attraction. It's wanting to use another person sexually. You don't care about them as a person. You just want to have them satisfy your passions. Masturbation is an offense against chastity. Fornication, sex outside of marriage. Pornography, which is a scourge on our culture. Prostitution, rape, and then homosexual acts, all right? So it's not spoken of as a particularly horrible act. It's listed with all these other sexual difficulties that people have. Most every one of us have done something on this list. And so the temptations to sexual sins are universal. Now, what does the Catechism say about homosexuality? It says the number of men and women who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies is not negligible, 2%, and that isn't negligible. This inclination, which is objectively disordered, constitutes for most of them a trial. They must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. There's our clues right there: respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives, and if they are Christians, to unite to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross the difficulties they may encounter from their condition. The phrase objectively disordered is one that offends many in this homosexual community. And what they don't understand is that phrase refers to every human being. Every human being is objectively disordered. The same-sex attraction or homosexual tendencies are just one of many sexual disorders and many kinds of disorders. Overeating, spending too much money, sleeping too much, drinking too much, all of those are objective disorders. So we really, when anybody says it's so offensive that they say that, you say you could agree with them. I understand that if you may see it as being offensive because you don't understand it in context, but let me explain it to you in context. We're all objectively disordered, right? So it goes on to say there's a universal need for chastity. Chastity includes an apprenticeship in self-mastery, which is a training in human freedom. The alternative is clear. Either man governs his passions and finds peace, or he lets himself be dominated by them and becomes unhappy. Man's dignity therefore requires him to act out of conscious and free choice, as moved and drawn in a personal way from within, and not by blind impulses in himself or by mere external constraint. Man gains such dignity when, ridding himself of all slavery to the passions, he presses forward to his goal by freely choosing what is good, and by his diligence and skill, effectively secures for himself the means suited to this end. Now, what are the objections to church teaching? Well, this is the phrase you'll often hear. Everyone deserves to love and be loved. And everyone should be able to marry the person he or she loves. Now, on the surface, that sounds absolutely sensible. We are made to love and to be loved. That's why God gave us bodies. That's why he gave us sexual bodies, so that we could love and be loved in a very affirmative, self-giving, unitive way with others. But number two is not true. A lot of people don't get to marry the person he or she loves. A lot don't, for all sorts of reasons. And we'll talk about these things as we go through. One objection is that homosexuality is natural, by which they mean there are many in the population. Some people claim it's genetic. Some say some homosexual persons have identified as homosexual since an early age. And if it was so early, it can't be something they acquire. Some people say that the experience of homosexuals so that the homosexual lifestyle or homosexual being is good. And some people argue that if we allow infertile heterosexuals to marry, so should homosexuals be allowed to marry. Infertile heterosexuals can't procreate. So if that's not an obstacle to marriage for them, why should be an obstacle for those with same-sex attraction? One reply to homosexuality is natural is that there is absolutely no evidence of a genetic basis to homosexuality. For instance, children of homosexuals are not more likely to become homosexual. If it was passed on through genetics, you would expect those who are homosexual, and homosexuals do have children. One of my brother-in-laws is a same-sex father of 4 with my sister. Identical twins are not more likely to both be homosexual. And if they have exactly the same DNA, exactly the same genetic makeup, you would think if one's homosexual, the other would be, and that evidence does not show that at all. The causes of homosexuality actually point to some kind of woundedness in a person's being. And woundedness is something, again, we all have in our being. First of all, because of original sin, and then because of things other people have done to us, and then choices that we've made ourselves. And the health consequences of homosexual activity are very serious. And generally, if we think something leads to bad health, it shows that it's not good for our nature. This is a very recent study in 2019 in Scientific America. This massive study, it says, finds no single genetic cause of same-sex sexual behavior. Analysis of 500,000 people suggests genetics may have a limited contribution to sexual orientation. It says the researchers found 5 single points in the genome that seemed to be common among people who had had at least one same-sex experience. 2 of these genetic markers sit close to genes linked to sex hormones and to smell, both factors that may play a role in sexual attraction. But taken together, these 5 markers explained less than 1% of the differences in sexual activity among people in the study. When the researchers looked at the overall genetic similarities of individuals who had had a same-sex experience, genetics seemed to account for between 8 and 25% of the behavior. I don't know how they quite reconcile it. I've got to go study that study carefully. I just found it this afternoon to see how they make the second claim after the first. But at least it seems that genetics account for not much of same-sex experience. The texts generally show, the studies show, that there is no evidence that is genetically caused. The consensus is that it is a combination of social, biological, and psychological factors. I mean, just because it's not genetic doesn't mean it's not biological. Sometimes children experience things in their mother's womb that might cause it, or some chemicals have entered into their system. Even if it were genetic, we generally don't take that as a total justification. There have been studies in the past that have suggested that alcoholism is genetic. We don't say it's okay then to be an alcoholic in the sense of continuing to drink all the time and not fulfill your duties, responsibilities, etc. The causes and lifestyles point to a wound of some kind. Homosexuality is an emotionally based condition. It comes from the need for same-sex parents' love. In some way, the person with same-sex attraction hasn't had the experience of the same-sex parents' love that they needed for healthy development. There's a need for acceptance of their gender identity. They don't feel fully male or fully female. It doesn't mean they're transgendered, but they don't feel like they're fully masculine or fully feminine. And there's a fear of intimacy with someone of the opposite sex. They just don't think they'll measure up. Weak gender identity comes from many things. These are just examples. Weak masculine identity can sometimes come from low athletic ability, especially in a culture that idolizes athletes. A rejection by peers, males who won't accept a male that's not perceived by them to be as masculine as they are. And the father could be a distant, critical, selfish, angry, or alcoholic. Women are more complex, but 3 of the characteristics here are mother conflicts. A girl doesn't feel as feminine as her mother is, or her mother is not feminine enough and doesn't like her mother for her femininity, all sorts of things. peer rejection, again, girls don't like her, bully her, or she has a poor body image. It's a rare female who doesn't have a poor body image. Childhood abuse. You have a chart here what other sex-attracted males, same-sex attracted males, other sex-attracted females, and same-sex attracted females. Just one part of it to look at is that whereas 2% of males who are heterosexual experience sexual abuse, 15% of males with same-sex attraction have in childhood. I don't know exactly what years those are, but I've read up to 40% of males have experienced that who have same-sex attraction. Women, and these are, look how high these are comparatively speaking, that women who are heterosexuals have experienced 10% of them have experienced sexual abuse. I've heard as high as 1 out of 4 in other studies, and this one says 34% of females same-sex attracted. This is a woman who writes on female sex attraction. This woman, Ann Polk, says an astounding 90% of women with same-sex attraction experienced some form of abuse themselves. This abuse was not just sexual, but included emotional abuse, 70%, sexual, more than 60%, and verbal abuse, more than half of those surveyed. 58% from a non-family male, 24% from a family friend, other family member, 23%, brother, 23%, females, from females, 17%. There are numerous psychological health risks. Numerous conflicts make homosexual behaviors abnormal, including rampant promiscuity, inability to maintain commitment, psychiatric disorders, and medical illnesses with a shortened lifespan. They're 4 times more likely to have major depression, 3 times more likely to suffer from anxiety disorder, 4 times more likely to experience conduct disorder, and 6 times more likely to have attempted suicide. Now, some people will argue that's because they are bullied by others that they have all of this, but the figures are exactly the same in cultures where homosexuality is very much accepted, which is getting more and more to be in our culture. This is a marvelous document, Homosexuality and Hope. Just type that in Google. It's by the Catholic and Medical Association. It gives all sorts of data on the scientific studies. There's a study that was done in Amsterdam that showed that even among supposedly stable homosexual partnerships, homosexuals have an average of 8 partners a year outside of their allegedly monogamous relationship. These are people who said, I'm a monogamous gay man. And you say, well, how many sexual partners have you had this year? Oh, an average of 8, right? Now, what is it when we say homosexual is unnatural? Well, it's true that all sin is against nature. It's against living in accord with our nature or our being. It's against living in accord with right reason. There are all sorts of unnatural sexual relationships. A parent with a child is an unnatural, that's incest. Any adult with a child is unnatural. Polygamy is unnatural. A brother with a sister is unnatural. A doctor with a patient is unnatural. And a teacher with a student is unnatural. And what we mean here is that these are not, there can be love between these individuals for sure, but they shouldn't be sexual. The sexual element is something that is damaging to the love rather than something that enhances the love. There are many different kinds of love. This too, we have brother and sister, we have sister and sister, we have grandmother and grandson, we have friends. These small children, I love my nieces and nephews. It's a great kind of love. Even a boy with his dog is a wonderful love. So our culture tends to think the only love there is between people who are sexually attracted to each other. But there is powerful, powerful love relationships between many different individuals. The importance of natural marriages. You can find all sorts of studies that show that if you want children to be healthy and happy, they need to be raised by a man and a woman who love each other and have made a lifetime faithful commitment to each other. And that nothing can supply for a girl and a boy what a mother and a father who are married to each other can do. Certainly women, these are 2 women who have adopted children. These are 2 men who have adopted 4. I suppose these look like they're quadruplets. They look close in age, but maybe just 2 sets. I don't know. Maybe 2 sets of twins, I guess. But this is the natural relationship that brings the complementarity to the relationship that is meant to be there. Sterility, yes, old heterosexual man and a woman, they are sterile. But when even you look at this, these pictures, you see a complementarity between the man and the woman that allow for a sort of completeness in directing towards the world that the others don't. There are many testimonies of chaste people with same-sex attraction, some of which I think are actually spiritual classics. I love this one by Wesley Hill called Washed and Waiting. Eve Tushman is a very interesting person, written this book, Gay and Catholic. Her story is fantastic. This is one I truly think is a classic, a spiritual classic, a gay son's journey to God, a broken mother's search for hope out of a far country. He's now a professor of biblical studies, this young man, Christopher Ewan, who wrote this book. But it's talk about God chasing someone down. God chased down Christopher Ewan and his mother and his father. This is a marvelous book by Daniel Mattson, Why I Don't Call Myself Gay. He says, gay is not his identity. He is a beloved son of the Father. And he may experience same-sex attraction, but being gay is not who he is. All right. There's many terrific videos. One is called The Third Way. Another was called The Desire of the Everlasting Hills. I love that one. Really incredibly worth watching. Now, how do you live with SSA? You likely feel lonely a lot of the time. You feel like the odd one out. There's a marvelous group called Eden Invitation. It's a new one, and it's a great support group. It doesn't focus a lot on people's same-sex attraction. It just focuses on being human and being alive, even though you experience this attraction. Don't let it define you. Courage has been around for a long time and has a very developed program, all sorts of retreats and materials for those who want to grow in holiness. Encourage is a group for family members of those who have same-sex attraction. Is change possible? As you know, many states it's not even legal to try to help someone who has unwanted same-sex attraction. You're not allowed to help them. Some studies show about 33%. Some show higher, 33%. That's true for almost any program that attempts change. Weight Watchers has about 33% managed to keep the weight off. 33% lose weight but put it back on. 33% don't make much change at all. I'm going to skip some of these because I'm getting close, but this is a wonderful site by Joseph Nicolosi, who is no longer with us, but he offered all sorts of psychological insight to men with same-sex attraction. These are two books that are extremely helpful for women who may experience same-sex attraction. Now I'm going to give you just 4 stages of recovery. Cut ties with homosexual fantasy, stop the behavior, build a new network of friends, and a relationship with God. That works with anything that's troubling you, believe me. If you eat too much, cut ties with eating too much, stop it. Build a new network of friends and a relationship with God. Develop skills for happiness, communication skills, assertiveness training, cognitive therapy, inner child work. Identify homo-emotional wounds, heal them, develop healthy same-sex friends. Identify and heal hetero-emotional wounds, heal them, learn about the other sex. A lot of the therapy is not directed towards the same-sex attraction. It's just directed towards what other woundedness, anger management, low self-esteem, bad body image, and you work on those. You don't work on the same-sex attraction directly. And as you work on those other things, the same-sex attraction can greatly diminish. And there's 4 different areas that you need to do. And believe me, this works for almost anything. If you feel like your life is a little bit out of control, read Jordan Peterson's 12 something or other steps to sanity or something, and or do this. They're all very similar. These are daily things you need to do. I don't believe this, no caffeine, but all right. Eat healthy, sleep, exercise, pray, experience gratitude, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'll give you these slides. Embrace your cross, right? That's not advice people like these days, but there are huge crosses that people bear. And usually when I feel sorry for myself, God shows me someone who's suffering a whole lot more than I am. Mental illness is a horrible cross. So are a lot of diseases and handicaps. So is poverty. So is living under oppression with no religious freedom. So is being a refugee. So is infertility, death of a spouse, child, friend, or grandparent, not finding a suitable spouse. All of us have crosses. And I do think same-sex attraction is a particularly difficult cross. I don't want to diminish it at all. But we have to understand this is a world of crosses. And we have to embrace it and just say, okay, God gave me this cross. What does he want me to do with it? Right? You look at these people, they manage some degree of happiness, and maybe even a greater degree of happiness that they ever would have had they not been handicapped. There's a rising share of never married adults. The percentage of people 25 and older who have never been married is insanely high. So when people with same-sex attraction say, I'll never get married, you say, well, a lot of heterosexuals aren't getting married either. How to love persons with SSA. Number one, spend time with them, listen to them, understand their experience. What do they think is the source of their same-sex attraction? What has been their experience of living with it, right? Parents, it's not all about you. If your children come with this, don't focus on yourself. Focus on them. Maybe say, wait a minute, before you say much more, I just need to get myself together. But I do want to listen to you. I do want to hear about it. In fact, yes, just talk. I'm not going to say anything right now, but I just want to hear from you. Pray that God will show you how to love them. That's very important. Don't think you have to go at them with the catechism or a brochure or anything. Ask God and say, God, when should I say something? How should I say something? What if I should say something? What should I say? All right, don't go in with some sort of zeal. Go in with love and understanding, and do hope that someday you will have the opportunity to say what you think. And you have to have that. It's not a relationship unless you do, unless you're able to say what you really think. But you want to make certain that it's done in the context of a relationship where you have listened to that person and understood them, and then you want to ask them to understand you. Do accept them, and that doesn't mean approval, but it doesn't mean, it means definitely not shunning them and say, I won't have anything to do with you. You've done this, you've left the church, you've done that, you've made mom and dad mad, you've broken their hearts. No, you say, well, we've got something to work on here. You're my brother, you're my sister, I love you, you're my friend, whatever. All right. Lovingly share your beliefs about homosexuality. One thing is to share information. Just say, listen, I'll read this book, if I'll read any book you want me to read if you'll read this book or article or visit this website. And then let's talk about it and try and talk about it again with great love. Don't be afraid to meet their partners. Go to their places sometimes. Parents really should meet their partners. You're probably going to like this person. If your child loves this person, probably a pretty good person. You're probably going to like them. And there might be even ways you can talk to that person more than you can to your child. Sometimes go to their places, even sometimes like a gay bar or parade, and it's very hard to do. I've never done it, but some parents say it's horrible, but their children see how horrible it is by not realizing that they don't really want to take their parents there. All right, assure them that God loves them. Right, God loves them, and share your personal relationship with Christ, what Christ is doing for you, and pray and fast for them. Oh, I think I brought the plane in just about on time. Again, always to remember that hopefully this is where we are all headed, all right? And we're all going to be, you see how every one of those is clothed differently. Our individuality is extremely important. And many of these people, just like Jesus, will have wounds on his body. We'll all have wounds of different kinds. And as many have said, that Jesus's wounds in the afterlife were beautiful. They were gems. They got polished up, and that's what we'll see with every one of these people is going to be beautiful, just unbelievably beautiful and unbelievably recognizable as those that we loved in this world, and even with all of their wounds, but now their wounds will be beautiful. All right, let's stop this and see what we can do. I'm back.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, for sharing that. I really found what you said about the importance of not believing this lie that we've been fed in our culture, that we have to satiate all of our appetites, that we feel something, we want something, we have to go out and get it, is really important. I think it's a lesson that we need to learn, like in regards to this issue, but in general.
All right, so now we will open up to questions. All right, the first question is from Austin. What are some examples of the difference between accepting the person and approving of their actions?
Well, very good question. And again, that'll be different for every person. But accepting means you don't kick them out of your life. Number one, all right. If someone says to you, there's something I'm probably going to tell you. I mean, I've also, they might say something. Or you've been outspoken against same-sex marriages or something. I just want you to know that's what I experience. And then, of course, you don't reject them. You say, well, gee, thank you for telling me. All right. I don't want this to be an obstacle between you. You know what I think, and I'd like to explain it more at some time. But it's not a reason that I would ever reject you. In fact, it's a way it makes you particularly valuable to me. All right. I want us to continue to be friends and to learn how to deal with this and talk about it. But just like I had a friend once who went through my whole kitchen. I mean, this is many years ago, 50 years ago, picked out every can that he thought had too much sodium in it, and said, why are you eating this? Why did you buy this? It was pretty obnoxious. But at the same time, he loved me. And that's why he was doing it. And so you want to say, I want to talk to you about this at some time, about what I think about it. We'll find the right time to do it, but I'll do it only out of love. I'll do it because I love you, not because I sort of hate this sin or hate these people. No, it's because I'm wounded and I like it when people help. I mean, I have a lot of friends who tell me a lot when I'm getting out of line. And I love it, honestly. It's just like, wow, find someone who'll speak the truth to you out of love is really a huge thing, And so I had a few fights with a friend the other day about something, gun control or something. And it was so funny. We really went at each other. But the next, I sent her a note later. She's still mad. And she goes, no, I love your passion. We'll talk about this again. And so we were very divided on something. But now, obviously, sexual attraction is much more rooted than, say, your view on gun control. And you can feel rejected if people don't like your sexual choices. I don't like the sexual choices of some of my nieces and nephews, and it breaks my heart. But I try very hard to be in the right relationship with them, and I don't always know what to do. I pray a lot and say, should I bring it up? How should I bring it up? When should I bring it up? And I say, God, give me an avenue. And sometimes He does give me a beautiful one, and other times it never comes up. And sometimes I feel bad. I think maybe I should have made it come up. But as I get older, the more I just say, God, if you want me to do something, I will do it if you give me a good sign that I'm supposed to do it. And sometimes He really gives me a good sign.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Before we go on to the next question, we want to let you know to feel free to continue submitting your questions in the chat, and we'll continue sorting through them and bringing them forward. So our next question comes from Sarah. She asks, how would you respond to people who feel that they cannot morally interact with people who have same-sex attraction?
Who cannot what? I'm sorry.
Feel that they have a moral reason why they are not able to interact with people who have same-sex attraction.
I don't know what that would be. I don't know what the only reason I could think of for not interacting with people with same-sex attraction is if you're struggling with hate in your heart. And then I want to say, don't do it until you get rid of that hate. All right, that would be the only reason not to interact. Otherwise, it seems to me you're not being a good, would you not interact with people who are cohabiting? Would you not interact with people who are getting drunk on weekends? Would you not interact with, you could just name who are failing out of school because they're partying too much and wasting their money and their parents' money. If you start not interacting with people that are sinful, they couldn't interact with yourself, but there'd be almost no one that you could interact with. So I'd say the only reason not to do it would be if you thought you couldn't do it without being hateful. And maybe if you couldn't do it without you couldn't manage not to show approval. But I think in both of those, a certain one, I'd keep the relationship, but try to overcome the showing approval. I think a relationship is extremely important.
All right, thank you. The next question is from Chris. As many of us look ahead to the possibility of being parents, how should we navigate exposing our children to same-sex couples in our culture, whether family, friends, or parents of their friends?
Yeah. Honestly, I do think it's going to be your generation that's going to help with all of that. Again, though I know very few families, or I know a lot of few families who do have that situation where one of the children comes home with their same-sex partner and expect to be fully accepted. And you want to say, and that's where, again, I would take them out to lunch and I would say, you know, I want to meet your partner. I want to talk to you, but listen, no physical affection when you're around the family. All right. You won't be able to sleep in the same bedroom. When we take family pictures, it's not, no, you know, but we want you to come. We want you to bring your friend. Always refer to the other person as your friend. Because again, I think your generation is going to teach my generation more about how to do that. And it were different approaches were actually appropriate in different generations. One of my brothers, when he was in college, moved back to our very small hometown and was living with his girlfriend, which wasn't so usual at that time. This was in the 60s. People didn't do that all the time. And you didn't bring them home to your small town and do this. And it was just torturous for my parents and us. I mean, we still love him. He's our son and we love her. She's nice. We hope he marries her, but we don't want them cohabiting and we don't want the kids thinking we approve of it. Of course, he wouldn't go to church on Sunday. And so, you know, they had to try hard. And I think they did a good job. It was clear to us that they still loved him and even loved her. I mean, it's so easy to blame the other person, thinking that person has led your child into sin. It's just probably not true. It's probably incredibly mutual. But you just want to find ways to continue to show your love for the wayward one, but making it clear to the others that you think they've made bad choices, but you still love them when they make bad choices. I think that's what you just have to keep pushing.
Thank you. Our next question is from Hannah. She says, how did we get to the acceptance level with SSA that we are at today? What are some societal factors that have led to a greater acceptance of SSA?
Oh my gosh, it's a fantastic question, and I could talk for hours and hours on it. But there certainly came a time in philosophy where we abandoned the notion that there was anything spiritual, and that all we are bodies. And if all we are bodies, there's no reason you can't change things. Like I can sell my Toyota and buy a Honda. And switch out anything I want, put any fenders I want on, paint it any way I want. It's just a body. And if I'm just a body, then why can't I just do anything I want to my body? If I'm a body that just came about through evolution without any spiritual element to it. But if I'm a person with an immortal soul that's made by God, and I'm made in God's image as male and female, right? And my maiden image is a female. Then that's part of what I deal with. I mean, I deal with being 5'3" for crying out loud. And I'm dealing with a certain age. I'm 71 years old. And these are challenges, all right? But it's a given. And part of being a Christian and loving God's world is loving the givenness of things. These are given. And but there came a time where science did so many unbelievable things that we think we can just improve our reality forevermore, so I can change anything. If maybe in some other generation, if I wanted to be a member of the NBA, I could somehow do it. I could make myself 6'11" and incredibly athletic, and I could be in the NBA. But right now, ridiculous. All right. But we've come to think there's no limit, right? And one of the real keys, honestly, was contraception. Where with contraception, we decided that fertility was some kind of a curse, right? And that God made a mistake in making women as fertile as we are, and that we could put all these chemicals in our bodies to change something that was totally natural, which is our fertility, and that we treated it as though it were some sort of defect. I mean, I have eyeglasses because I can't see well, but being fertile at a certain age is a very healthy condition, and those who are infertile are the ones who are not healthy. But we decided that we wanted to control our fertility, not in natural ways, and there are natural ways to do it, but we were willing to put very toxic chemicals in our bodies. And then you begin to think that sex is no longer about procreation. Procreation is a threat to human happiness. It's better if I can have sex without babies, because they obviously get in the way of my happiness. And then all of a sudden, if sex is just about pleasure, then why not have sex with anybody you want to have sex with, right? Why not have sex with anybody you want to have sex with? And so it takes away the important male-female difference of complementarity. That I mean, in a certain sense, a woman, when she's taking contraception, she has a body more like a male's because he can't get pregnant. He can never get pregnant. But she is in a state where she can't get pregnant now either, as opposed to saying, no, my body kind of dictates what goes around here. My body is a body that can get pregnant. I'm not going to engage in that act unless pregnancy is a good thing for the both of us and for the baby. That's a rule here. And all of a sudden, the woman's kind of in the driver's seat, not completely, of course, but she's saying, listen, my body has babies, and I guess you can just walk off, but I can't. And if I have a baby, you're going to be around and you're going to help. And he should be saying, I want to, I want to have a baby with you. I want to be around. I want to help. Let's tie the knot. Let's put the ring on the whole thing and let's get moving and have that family. But too often now we treat the fertility as if it gets in the way of, well, if I tell him I'm not having sex until we're married, and if I'm saying that I'm not using contraception and he'll leave me, then I'm going to say goodbye. Find the man that's not like that. Find the man that says, I love you and your body and I want to have babies with you. That's what I said. So I think there's a lot of reasons, but that's a major one, is that we no longer love our bodies the way God gave them to us. And we think we can radically remake them into whatever we want.
Thank you. The next question is from David. What prompted you to get into this work? Pastorally, how do we embrace same-sex attraction without enabling? And then the third question, how do we think about the cases that aren't stereotypical, like long-term homosexual relationships?
You might have to help me remember all of those.
Yeah, so the first one, what prompted you?
Well, yeah. I'll try not to make my answers too long, but I actually got into the whole thing because of abortion. I mean, I went to college in 1968 and abortion was illegal. I'd never heard of abortion, honestly, until I was 19. And then there were movements to try to legalize abortion. And I went to the library and I looked it up. I couldn't believe it because my mother had two babies. One when there were 6 of us, but she had a baby when I was 11, another when I was 13. And I just came to love babies and I couldn't understand why anybody would do that. And then I made a connection between contraception and abortion, that it was women were thinking that they were having safe sex and then get pregnant and there was no place in the relationship for the baby. So I looked way more into contraception to see how awful it was. And why there are so many women were having abortions. Why are women having abortions? Well, because they're having sex with men they don't intend to have babies with. Why are they doing that? Because a contraception makes them think that that's a responsible thing to do. And then it became, as I said, clearer to me along the line, is that it was changing our radically different view of our humanity, our personhood, our sexuality, and was very closely connected with the whole same-sex attraction acceptance. How can we tell a man that he can't have sex with another man because it's not procreative when heterosexuals are deliberately making themselves incapable of procreation? Second question.
Yeah, so pastorally, how do we embrace same-sex attraction without enabling?
Again, it's keeping that conversation open, and it's finding opportunity to lovingly engage in a conversation about why it's not a good thing, and not being afraid of it, not being afraid of people putting you down, and try to convince yourself and make it true that you're acting out of love. If you're not, keep asking God to make you more loving. Just say, what's wrong with me that I can't be more loving? And don't do it until you are. But once you come to a point where you say, no, I really love this person, and the reason I'm doing this is not so I feel more virtuous and I feel superior and I feel like I'm the one that has the high moral ground, but simply because I love this person and I think these choices are very damaging now, immediately now, and for eternity. We're meant to be looking to the afterlife. And it's really hard to say that God really that he could possibly approve of same-sex attraction. I have one scriptural passage that I wanted to use. It's in 2 Corinthians. I think it's chapter 6 or 9. But it goes through all these things. You were once this and you were once that, and you were adulterers and this, that, and the other thing, and catamites and homosexuals. But now you are washed, sanctified, and saved, justified and saved. It's beautiful. And it's just like saying, okay, yeah, you're all something. You're all something. You're all greedy or lazy or something. but turn to Jesus and be sanctified. And yeah, there'll be a long time. Anytime we're peeling ourselves away from an attraction, especially or temptation, and most temptations are there because we're self-medicating, as they say. There's some wound that we're medicating, and we have to figure out what that wound is and why we're using such an inappropriate way or even sinful way to salve that wound instead of finding out what the real way to deal with that is. What is the real way to deal with it? Right. Third one.
All right, the third one is, how do we think about the cases that aren't stereotypical, like long-term homosexual relationships?
Well, I mean, there are such things, obviously, but there are almost none's ever been really completely faithful. I have one of my friends said that he was talking to a man in a same-sex relationship, and I've heard many stories like this, but said that, he said, have you been faithful to your partner? And he said, oh, yes, of course. And he said, does that mean you haven't had sex with anyone else? He said, oh, no, it doesn't mean that. It just means I haven't brought anybody else home. All right. So the notion of fidelity in the same-sex community is very different from the male homosexual community. In the female homosexual community, an act of unfaithfulness is usually a relationship killer. In the males, they expect to have other partners. That's part of what it's all about. So now some of those relationships last for a very long time, but most of those become non-sexual, right? They become non-sexual. They become good friends who live with each other, right? And so they just settle into kind of a nice friendship where they know each other well. They can help each other with life's challenges, but it's not sexual anymore. So I don't think there's many, honestly, if any, that resemble, let's say, a long-term heterosexual relationship with fidelity and a healthy sex life until you die. That happens in the heterosexual relationships. Almost never. I think I want to hear about one. I haven't heard about one. Someone tell me about one. Ask the hard questions. Do you mean you've never had sex or don't have sex with others? I mean, they go off to Las Vegas with each other, and while they're in Las Vegas, and I know this from testimony of people who have been in this world themselves, and what they say, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But they have group sex, they go their own way, they travel there, they travel back together. But while they're there, and that's part of, you understand, the fidelity in the heterosexual world is extremely important for many reasons. One is babies. You shouldn't be having babies with anybody but your wife, right? Because you have to be parents to those kids, and you don't want to have babies with another woman because now you got two sets of responsibilities and they're not very compatible. Well, fidelity isn't that important in some same-sex relationships. There's not a baby that's going to be damaged by infidelity, and so it just can't have the same level of importance. I mean, there's many a married man and many a married woman that's very tempted to adultery at times, but they say, can't do it. All right, I can't do it. There might be a baby that happens here, and that would just explode everything. So it's one more obstacle you have to doing bad things. You remove those obstacles and we'll do bad things. That's why there's so much promiscuity, because contraception supposedly removes the obstacle to promiscuity. It doesn't, but I mean, to the problems. Yes.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Faith. She asks or says, I have a dear friend who is gay, and he and many of our other friends were raised Catholic, but experienced a lot of hurt from the church. And they had the impression that that they would be received not well when they came out to Catholics. Do you have any specific tips for talking about the faith with them when it's a place where a good number of their wounds come from?
Well, but a good question is, where does the wound come from? Because it's what in the Catholic Church is because people are mean to them, and that would be awful. In which case, I would, if I were someone with same-sex attraction and a Catholic had been mean to me, I would show some of those passages from the Catechism that says I need to be treated with respect and compassion and sensitivity, and you're not living your Christianity very well. I might to talk to someone who's a friend of theirs, who's a good Christian, and say, this is how this person's treating me. I don't think you should accept that behavior. And actually, as a kind of fraternal correction, You try to help them become a better Christian. But if your problem with the church is that the church thinks you're sinning in your same-sex relationship, that's not the church's problem. That's your problem. All right. I mean, like, again, there's people I know that won't go to church because they're cohabiting, or they go to church and they could care less whether the church thinks that cohabitation is wrong. They think it's okay. And they're kind of hurt that the church disapproves of them. And you say, well, why do you belong to a church that disapproves of you? You know, it's a whole thing. I want them to still come. I want the people that I love that are cohabiting to still be a part of the Catholic Church. But I asked one of my beloved young people who was about to move in with his girlfriend, you know, I said, why are you doing that? You know that's not in accord with God's plan for sexuality. Oh, well, you know, the church has its opinion and I have my opinion. Well, you have an opinion, but the church doesn't have an opinion. The church has a teaching, and the church is guided by the Holy Spirit. And it has reasons, it has really good reasons, and it's worth listening to those reasons. But this young person just really gotten his dream job at his dream company. And I said, I'm guessing they want you to show up at a certain time for work, like 8 in the morning. And he said, yeah. I said, I bet you're going to show up at 8. He said, yeah. I said, what if your opinion was it'd be better if you did it at 10? Would you go at 10? He said, no, I'm going at 8. I said, well, why is it you say that the church opinion has its opinion, you have yours, and you still feel perfectly? He said, well, I'm going to get married in the church. I said, what will that mean to get married in the church if you're not living in accord with the church's teaching? You want to take advantage of a ceremony or a backdrop, but you're not making a complete commitment to be a member of this community with the teachings in this community. It's cafeteria Catholicism. You're picking and choosing what you believe. And Jesus didn't say that. Jesus said, you know, you can pick which 8 of the 10 commandments you want to live by, and I'll give you a waiver on the other 2. He said, no, you have to be all in. You have to be all in when you're a Christian. You can't say, I like these teachings, but I don't like those teachings. Say, I want to be a racist. I'm a racist. Well, and I still perfectly comfortable going to Catholic Church. I say, I'm sorry, you shouldn't feel comfortable. And it's not the church that's the problem who teaches you not to be a racist. You're the problem. And so, and I'm not saying I hate you for that. What I'm saying is there's something wrong in your heart, and get closer to God so that God can change your heart. That's what, yeah, if you find something in yourself, and I find stuff still, I really should still at this age, so I'm just shocked. I'll find something in myself and think, I can't believe I've been that way my whole life. And people kind of hint sometimes, you know, you're a little bit this way. And I say, oh, no, you don't understand me. I'm not that way at all. And then finally, you finally say, yeah, I really am. What am I going to do now? And then I just say, okay, God, we got to work on this. I didn't even know it before. Now, at least I know it. I can start watching for it, but I'm going to ask you to change this in me. So the person who suffers same-sex attraction doesn't like the church because the church says it shouldn't be in this relationship. And then I said, why do you want to go to this church? It's the same church that Eve Tushnet in her book talked about why when she wanted to become a Catholic, and she experienced many years, and she hasn't stopped experiencing same-sex attraction, but she wanted to become a Catholic because she understood the Eucharist was real. And she says, this is Jesus, and I want to receive Jesus in the Eucharist. And she said, if I can trust the church when it tells me this is the body and blood of Christ, why don't I trust the church when it tells me that homosexual acts are wrong? Why do I pick and choose about what I'm going to believe that the church teaches? And it was just she said, I didn't understand it. She said, but I accepted it because I realized if I accepted one thing, that in the Catholic Church, it really is of a piece. It's an incredibly coherent, logical set of teachings. You can't just pick one out, then the rest will crumble. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The next question is from Francisco. How would you explain to a homosexual person that chastity is actually better for them when the other option appears to be more freeing and authentic?
Oh, yeah. Well, again, you see, we do it all the time. And you see a married man who finds a woman that is much nicer to him and much more attractive than his wife. And that seems a whole lot more freeing and pleasant than being faithful to his wife. And it's miserable being faithful to his wife. She might not be that nice of a person, actually, right? And he has to make a decision. What am I going to do? Am I going to be faithful to my wife? Or am I going to pursue this really delightful, freeing, authentic relationship? As opposed to this other one where I've got to kind of feel like a phony when I'm bringing her flowers and everything because I'm not that happy with her. You say, wait a second. Again, you made vows, and those vows are determinative. And you will find people. And one thing that good to do is find a person. You can find a man, and you find a man and you say, has it always been easy to be faithful to your spouse? And there's a lot of them will say no. Well, what did you do when it got to be hard? Well, I did this. I put pictures of the family on my desk. I started bringing her flowers. I started making a date on Friday nights. I started wearing nicer clothes on the weekends instead of my ratty old t-shirts and cargo shorts. And I did a lot of stuff to clean myself up for her and start to serve her. And as I did that, she became a lot nicer to me, and things are a lot better. So you find someone who has same-sex attraction, is living a chaste life, and ask that person, is your life better now than it was before? So yeah, sometimes I'm lonely. Sometimes I have very powerful sexual attractions that's hard to fight. But overall, I'm telling you, I'm closer to God. I feel I have greater self-respect. I really feel that I can get closer and closer to Jesus, and I'm doing his work and his will instead of my will. And I'm feeling that when I'm feeling, otherwise I wallow in kind of self-pity as opposed to being the very self-assertive person that's saying, everybody knows what it's like to wallow in self-pity. I'm going to go drink a couple of glasses of wine, maybe 2 or 3 more than I should, or eat, a gallon of ice cream. You're wallowing in self-pity. Do you feel good about that? No. What's better? What's better is to say, yeah, no, I'm going to call a friend, going to go for a walk. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to read a book I've been dying to read. And before long, whatever it was that was just pushing me to go do something incredibly self-indulgent, it disappears. So that's what we all have to learn. We all have to learn how to govern ourselves. What are our triggers? What are the things that make us desperate? When we are desperate, it's great if you have what we call an accountability partner, someone you call up and say, I'm desperate. I'm about to do something really stupid. Can you talk me down? And you find at a certain point, once you get to that point, you say, oh, I know what they're going to say. They're going to say this, and I'm going to say that, and they're going to say this, and I'm going to say that. So I don't even have to call them. I know what I need to do. And you get to those points, but there's a lot of steps in between. So it's true with any temptation. They're powerful, but we have to learn ways to discipline ourselves, just like you would discipline your kid who's about to do something really self-destructive. Figure out, how do I help this kid not do it? What do I help them go? Instead of, spending all afternoon on your computer, go shoot a basketball for an hour. Do it. And they do it, and they say, Mom, I finally got that shot. That 3-pointer was coming along really well. Is that better than playing computer games all afternoon? Well, actually it is. So, or I built some muscles. So next week when I go to school, I'm looking at that girl, she'll notice my muscles. You see, all those things.
Thank you. The next question is, does Jesus address homosexuality, and what does he say?
He doesn't directly. And it's, God, he doesn't address a lot of things. He doesn't address sexual trafficking or rape or 1,000 things. He talks about, as the commandments don't, there's no commandment against rape. There's no commandment against sexual trafficking. There's no commandment against same-sex relationships. There is a commandment against adultery. And that teaches us everything we need to know about sexuality. It teaches us that sex belongs within marriage. And if it's not there, already it's not where it needs to be. It's somewhere else. And it belongs between a man and a woman who love each other and made a lifetime commitment to each other. And that anything that doesn't start there is wrong, all right? So the church doesn't talk a lot about the things that are really, like Jesus doesn't, and the 10 Commandments don't talk about things that are way on the fringes of what's wrong, because they're not even in the ballpark. They're not even in the ballpark. So the most of our sins are in the ballpark sins. So you at least want to get in the ballpark, and then you work on all of those. But no, he doesn't say anything directly against homosexuality. Certainly Paul does, very clearly. talks about it being unnatural and having idols, as opposed to, again, living in accord with God's will about homosexuality and about sexuality, and you will suffer greatly for the consequences of the actions. That's what Paul says, but Jesus doesn't. As I said, he doesn't talk a lot about a lot of things, though he does by principles. When he makes the principles clear, you can take those principles and see where you would lead with those things. It's not as if he leaves us in the dark. It's easy enough to know what Jesus would say because of what he says about fidelity and adultery.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Abby. She asks, as Catholics, what would you say to married same-sex couples wanting to have children without sounding like we are condemning them for wanting that?
Oh, you see, it's not just same-sex couples. There are many, many people who experience infertility, and it's an extremely, it's another great cross. It's up there with same-sex attraction. It's very, and I have a friend who, she wants to get married. She's been married, has a couple kids, one at least out of wedlock, maybe two. She's turned out to be a very devout Christian now, good Catholic, but she desperately wants to be married, right? And she feels embarrassed by that sometimes. Like, why should I be satisfied with Jesus? Why am I so desperate to be married? It's part of that's part of the human heart. God has given us this desire. And women who desperately want to have children, or men who desperately want to have a son and a daughter. See, nothing, that's a natural desire, all right? So it's a natural desire for people in same-sex relationships. They don't lose that natural part of their being because they have same-sex attraction. We want to be mothers and we want to be fathers. That's part of our identity. But it's just like everything else. We have to do it morally. We have to do those things morally. We can't use any means that we can find to achieve our ends. We have to work in accord with the universe that God has set up. And the universe that God has set up, some of us are not going to have our natural desires satisfied. It's just not going to happen. And it's again the woman whose husband dies, the woman whose child dies. They had dreams for their whole life. They had dreams for this child. Now that's not going to happen. And it's a fallen world. And so you have to throw yourself on the Lord and say, I can find no moral means to satisfy this desire. What are you going to help me do with it? What are you going to help me do with it? And God will find something. He'll find something that, and then at a certain point, how many people do you hear say, I thought it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I thought it was the worst cross anybody could bear. But 10 years later, 15 years later, I found out the biggest blessings in my life have come from that. You have to live a period of time to know that. But if you start paying attention, you'll see that. A lot of people say, again, having a handicapped child. Some people say, I never thought I could ever do that. Only special people get handicapped children, and they have special graces and special patience, and I don't. And then they have a handicapped child, and they say, wow. I have friends now, their first child of 8 is very severely handicapped. Has very little cognitive ability. He can walk, but he doesn't have bladder control or control of his well, anyway, you understand what I mean. He has to be fed by the bottle. He wakes up several times during the night. They went on to have 7 more kids, healthy kids, etc. But they say that this first kid, they say it's really hard. They rarely sleep a night through, but they say that it has helped make them so unselfish, and that they said their other 7 kids adore him and take care of him, and the blessings that he's brought into their life are unbelievable. Now, anybody looking at this, just like, I mean, these are amazing things, but they've done studies that show that someone who becomes a paraplegic because of some terrible traumatic accident, and someone who wins the lottery, all right, 5 years later, the person that became a paraplegic person is happier than the person who won the lottery, all right? Because the lottery, they don't know what to do with that money. They thought it would make them happy, and it doesn't. The person who became a paraplegic has to dig down and figure out what's really important in life, all right? And still find meaning and happiness. Now, if you gave me a choice, now I know this, I really know that. If you gave me a choice between a paraplegic or winning a lottery, I'd want to win a lottery, all right? Because it's almost impossible to make that choice, all right? And same with someone who saw this handicapped child. They say, well, they say that this has been wonderful for their marriage and their parenthood, maybe you should ask for this. Nobody's going to ask for it. All right. It's just not part of our nature to do that. But for us to realize that what seem to be terrible, terrible things that can happen to people turn out to be a huge blessing, that's what we have to trust God. We absolutely have to trust God and say, I don't believe that you want me to be miserable. So even though I have a cross that seems to make me miserable, and the only thing I can see that would make me not miserable is if you would take the cross away from me, I'm going to trust you, since that doesn't seem to be possible. I am going to trust you that I can find happiness within that cross and embracing that cross. So that's what I would say.
All right, thank you. Yeah, the next question is from Isaac. I don't understand the logic behind one of the slides. This one slide stated that the scientific consensus is that homosexuality is the result of various social, biological, and psychological factors. And the next slide lists 3 of them. That it is due to a lack of same-sex parents' love, along with 2 others reasons. Can you expand on these conclusions?
Well, I'd have to get the slide in front of me, but all we want to say is, so far as we, and not that we know in any kind of comprehensive way what are the causes of same-sex attraction. I mean, you could have 2 people, you have people who grow up in the same household, and the parenting is not that different between them. Or again, you have identical twins, and they're growing up in the same household, and one develops same-sex attraction and one does not. So obviously, there's got to be but they don't have the identical life experience. I mean, one of my nieces has identical twins, and they are so different as far as their temperaments are concerned. One's extremely sensitive, moody, and to an extent, little guy. The other one is just bold and energetic and happy. And you say identical twins, right? Now they're going to experience the world very differently because of what they bring to the world. So one child who, say, father is kind of rough with him and punches him and pushes him around and jokes with him and maybe puts him down in various ways, he loves that, all right? And he prospers with that, and he fights back against his dad, and he becomes just a great guy because he can take a lot. And another child might be traumatized by that, all right? It just might be, dad doesn't love me, dad doesn't care for me, and dad does love him and does care for him, but what he's doing is perceived by the child in a certain way. So again, all right, so that's part of the psychological differences. Relationship with fathers. Social ones might be go to school. They might go to different schools. In one school, there might be some really cruel boys who bully a kid who's not athletic. The other school, there might be some really sweet boys who will take the kid who's not athletic and bring him into the crowd and make him a part of the team and everything. And so you say, the same conditions with a different person will have different consequences for that person. So you can't pinpoint, say, well, sexual abuse or a kind of bullying father or a lack of athletic ability. No, it depends on what kind of context those things play out, whether or not they're going to contribute to a person having same-sex attraction. It's very complicated, and nobody's good. I don't know anybody who would say, I know what makes for what are the causes of same-sex attraction, because again, it's many contributing factors.
Okay, our next question comes from me, and so my question is, I was wondering, how do we respond to people who say that there has to be separation between church and state? When we talk about and think about like our perspective as in the church about marriage being between a man and woman, and then we address the debate around same-sex marriage, how do we mesh those 2 things, like being a Catholic who votes with our faith informing everything about our lives, and then also respecting separation of church and state? Yeah.
Oh, excellent question. Again, not the answers. You have to spend hours to give a kind of a full answer, but it's an excellent question. I mean, first of all, we have to understand that you have to go back and look at where the separation of church and state came from. All right, it wasn't that the state was threatened by religion; it was that religion was being separated by threatened by the state, and it was really to protect religion from being taken over by the state. All right, The founding fathers of this country, being good Aristotelian Platonists in a sense, they believed that the only way you could have a democracy is if you had a virtuous citizenry, right? A citizenry that could think, who had control over their passions, who couldn't be manipulated by seductive leaders, who could sort of feed their passions and get them to do things and vote for them by giving them money or bread and circuses, as they call. But people who had virtue and say, no, you can't seduce me into voting for you. I know what's right and what's wrong, and I'm going to vote that way. They thought the only way you could do that is if you had religion, right? That religion was the thing that produced in people virtue, right? So they didn't want to have the state telling us, I mean, well, a little preliminary here. I mean, this country was founded by believers, right, who came from countries that were suppressing their religious belief, in which countries were choosing this country is a Protestant state or this country is a Catholic state, and you're not going to be comfortable here if you don't have our views. You have to live in accord with our views. So they came here in order to practice their faith. But they weren't that interested in extending religious freedom to others. They wanted to have their own religious communities. And so there was this difficulty at the beginning, is that you're wanting to allow these people to practice their religion, but you want them to live together. And so you don't want to have a state religion, because a state religion would become oppressive. But you wanted freedom of religion big time, because you thought freedom of religion would help people be more virtuous. As a matter of fact, it's worth looking this up, but we have public education, and we tend to think people who send their kids to religious schools are somehow not cooperating with the public realm. You know, that you're indoctrinating your kids into your beliefs instead of entering into the civic project. Well, at the beginning of this country, it made perfect sense that everybody, all religions, educated their own kids, because they wanted their kids to be educated in their beliefs, which they believed to be true. So when they started public schools for poor kids, what they did was they had them read the Bible. That's what they were trying to teach them, to be literate, so that they could read the Bible. All right. And they thought that reading the Bible would help people become virtuous, and therefore you could have a democracy. And so it's not a simple question of state versus religion. They've always had an interesting dance with each other that a culture doesn't do very well unless it has religious believers. On the other hand, religious believers can become very intolerant of those who don't share their religion. And so you want ways to balance those, so that people are perfectly free to practice their religion, but we are not imposing our religious views on others. The church has some complicated teachings about that, but it's a marvelous question. I don't know if that helps, but it just gets, I guess at least will show people that it's complicated. It's and there's very interesting concerns that we want the state to protect religious freedom and not to impose religion on anybody. But we also do have to make certain that religions don't try to impose their views on others. But as far as marriage is concerned, honestly, it's very hard to find anybody in the history of mankind that thought a man could marry a man or a woman could marry a woman. And there's some marvelous books by Ryan Anderson and well, it's a good place to start, and Robbie George and others, who explain why the culture has an interest in male-female marriages. Again, because everything shows that when a man and a woman have made a commitment to each other, get married, they do financially way better than those who don't. Their children do way better than those who don't. And the whole culture thrives by marriage and children being raised by their parents, right? And that the other relationships that we have, where people come together and break up and all sorts of things, it doesn't make much difference to the whole. It's not something that makes a huge difference to the culture. But when you start treating it as the same thing, then especially children think it doesn't make any difference whether you're in a heterosexual relationship or a homosexual relationship. They're all the same. You say, no, one is very individual and the other is very communal. I mean, kids, what a kid, you have to have schools, you have to have shoes, you have to have buses, you have to have this, you have to have that. Children drive an economy. If you don't have a population that's growing, and you type it in and look it up, we're in a demographic, as I say, demographic winter. We're in a very bad position where we are not having enough babies to keep our economy going. Tons of the money that we spend in any kind of sensible fashion is spent trying to raise children. Otherwise, it's all self-indulgent. That's not a good thing.
Thank you. I found that very helpful, Dr. Smith.
Okay.
All right. I just want to let everyone know that both the recording of the lecture tonight and Dr. Janet Smith's slides will be on the YouTube video on the Newman Center's YouTube channel. So that'll be up in the next couple days. So you guys can go back and refer to all of the content in the slides. The next question is from Frank. Should a Catholic parent of a child with same-sex attraction attend their child's wedding ceremony? Or if you have a friend or relative who is homosexual and getting married to their partner, is it a good and correct response to not attend the marriage because you can't morally support it?
Oh my gosh. My friends and I talk about this a lot, and I've been talking about it for decades with people. One of my sisters got married outside of the church. It was to a man who needed an annulment, and he didn't have an annulment, right? There's many other curious factors about that, but I was supposed to be her maid of honor. I adore my sister, right? And she adores me. And it was one of the hardest things I'd ever did. I decided I wouldn't go to a wedding because it was the particular form that this was taking was a sacrilege. And I said, I can't participate in a sacrilege. I can't stand up there and be a witness to something that is not. And my sister loves me and I love her. And about 3 weeks after the wedding, she called me up and we just continued our friendship like it had always been. Several other family members were so furious at me, they didn't speak to me for a year, right? Because I didn't go. I might do it differently now. I might explain things to people better than I did then, all sorts of things. Fast forward maybe two decades later, 20 years later, I have friends who have a son who's getting married outside the church. They're very devout Catholics, and they're trying to figure out what to do. I said, what do you mean, what are you going to do? He said, we're trying to figure out whether to go to the wedding or not. I said, I thought you would never go to a wedding of a kid of yours that was married outside the church. She said, no, it's not that easy. It's okay, tell me. And she said, well, our children, the other children don't understand it. They think it can only come out of judgmentalness and hate and this sort of thing. So we're praying and praying and praying about it. And they found some way to do it, to go. And they said, those getting married and the other children watching this, they all knew where they stood. All right. But for them, the parents making the sacrifice to go was a sign of love, all right, to all of them. So they didn't see it as approving at all. They didn't in any way see that their presence at that wedding wasn't approving. So I think a lot of it has to do with, and I had another friend who wouldn't go to her brother's wedding because he was living with his girlfriend, and told her, I'm not going to go unless you two stop living together before you get married. And he did. He said, oh, you're right. We shouldn't be doing this. And her pressure made him enter into became more Catholic, became more committed to the relationship, etc. So you have to gauge who you're dealing with and how this would affect them. All right. So I could not see myself going to the wedding, let's say, of a niece and nephew who were entering into a same-sex relationship. I can't imagine it. I have gone to those where they're cohabiting, not easily, not comfortably, having let them know ahead of time what I thought, lovingly. They knew what I thought. And then there is distance cousins that I'll go to their weddings, and they might not even know what I think, but I do it to keep family relationships intact. All right. So that maybe someday, they might become my friend on Facebook and read my postings on Facebook, and it might be educational for them. So I'm trying to keep the line of communication open. So I think your comfort level counts. I think a person's comfort level counts. With my sister, I do not think to this day I would have done it differently. I could not have done that. All right. And my conscience counts. Other times, I think you can make a sacrifice, not of your conscience, but of your comfort level, and say, I'm extremely uncomfortable with this, but I think it will be perceived not as approval, but will be perceived as loving. All right. And since I can't get people to make that distinction right here that I want to make, I'm going to take this risk and do it this way. But I think you have to gauge how it's going to come down.
All right, the second question is, as Catholics, should we be seeking to slow or resist this cultural shift on a legal basis, like overturning Obergefell and Hodges, or should we be seeking to evangelize first and put the legal and political constitutional aspects to the side?
Yeah, these are all just excellent questions. And I wish I had for some of them more thoughtful answers. But I mean, there's certainly ones I faced in my life. I'm not a very political person. I don't think that's a virtue. All right. I'm just not, I've never gone to a party convention or anything. I vote. That's what I give money, but I don't spend a lot of, I just take somebody else's advice on who to vote for. I don't do I go to the Right to Life site and I vote wherever they tell me to. So I don't get terribly involved. I don't think that's a virtue. It may be what God wants of me. I hope it is, but I haven't even asked him a lot about that. I'm extremely grateful for the people who, in the spite of what seems to be hopelessness for decades about pro-life, have worked very hard to pass laws. And I think progress has been made and progress will continue to be made. At the same time, I think all the other things that pro-lifers have done, which I have done a lot of that. I have set up a pregnancy help center. I've done a lot of education, all sorts of things, direct help with women, all sorts of things. Those are all extremely important. And part of it has to do with what God is calling you to do. I suspect the most important thing in life, how do you like this? Write this down, everybody. It's an outrageous thing to say. All right, but right now I'm going to say, I think the most important thing in life is learning how to hear God's voice. All right, what God wants of you. There's so many important things to do in this world. There's so many causes that are important. And even within any given cause, like in pro-life, you can do politics, education, pregnancy pro-life center, adopting kids. There's so many different things you can do. And you just have to ask God, what do you want me to do? All right. I don't think we should ever stop evangelizing, but some of us aren't good at it, right? In any direct way. So I say, I want to support those who are good at it. I'll give them whatever they need to do it. I'm good at something else. And so we all have to find out what it is God wants us to do and then do it. That's what I was saying. So don't give up the evangelization, but don't give up. The same-sex attraction, I never thought same-sex marriages would get accepted. That's why don't listen to me. I want to say, I never thought it would. If you looked at the polls, if you looked at the voting, it was not going to happen. The American public was absolutely against it. And within a few short years, because of some very intelligent education by the advocates for same-sex marriage, and what they did with the media was incredible. What they did with Ellen DeGeneres and Will and Grace, and they completely normalized things. And so people were totally against it. And then in some places, the courts overturned it instead of the legislature. But before long, it was the legislature. And before long, you take polls, and most of the American public agree with it. And so the evangelization is extremely important. But we're finding, some states are doing very good with laws against abortion that are helping reduce the number of abortions, keeping babies alive and keeping their mothers intact in their psychology and in their being. Extremely important. So I say do both, but you personally do what God wants you to do.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Thank you so much for speaking tonight. We found your lecture to be incredibly insightful, and we appreciate your contribution to the Newman Lecture series. In this world where everyone is honestly really thirsting for love and seeking it from sources that will not satisfy, it's so important for us as Catholics to know and share that the only love that will make us feel whole is the love that comes from Jesus Christ.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm so honored to be invited. And I just it gives me great hope that you have decided to host such a thing, and that there's so many people that came, and even those of you who disagreed and knew you would disagree. I really appreciate your coming, because I really think that you're being willing to listen to something you believed and you would not agree with, and maybe you don't agree with, but at least you tried to. I mean, I don't want, that's not even the right word I want to use. You were open-minded enough to listen, and I do hope I listen. I I'm sure there's many times I don't do a good job, but I really think listening to the other person is so important. Sometimes I do think, I mean, when I was so involved in the pro-life movement, I thought I'd gotten to know the pro-life argument so well that I could make their case for them better than they could. Okay, I didn't want to do it, but I think you pretty much want to get to that point where you can make the case of the opposition as strong as they can make it. And then so you understand them from the inside out, and you sympathize, because there's going to be truths in there. There in this instance, there maybe people who have very low self-esteem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the only way they're accepted by the homosexual community, and that's why they go there, because they get affirmation, et cetera. Listen to that, right? That gives us a good idea of what we need to do. I didn't mean to start talking again, but thank you very much, all of you.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate it.
Special
thank you also to all of our sponsors who support and makes these important and relevant conversations along with everything we do here at the Newman Center possible. So if you're interested in supporting the Newman Lectures, you will see a link in the chat to do so in just a moment.
This is the 6th and last Newman Lecture of the academic year. It has been our absolute pleasure to host and be a part of this unique year's Newman Lecture series with all of you. Before we close, I want to invite you once again to our Alpha program starting this Tuesday. I highly encourage you to take part in this course if you haven't, and to invite your friends and classmates if you have. You can sign up on our website, osunewman.org. With that, we conclude the lecture. On behalf of the entire Newman Lecture Series team, Zach and I, and all those who are behind the scenes doing tech and managing your questions, we thank you for your participation. Have a wonderful evening.